Hi, I'm Jack Howell. For the bass clarinetist, Tchaikovsky's Manfred Symphony is like Liszt's Dante Symphony in that the rest of the wind section has to fight for their lives while we get to come in and kick a field goal with a lyrical solo. The bass clarinet similarity between the two works was, I believe, not a coincidence. I'll get to that in a minute after we look at some nuts and bolts. As I have said before, the orchestral musician's job often consists of playing simple music as though our lives depended on it. Manfred is rarely programmed, but the solo just showed up on the Milwaukee list, so it's worth studying. So looking at the solo, first remember Tabito's singing interval. Much of what separates one player from another in auditions is the quality of legato intervals. I'm not telling you what to do, but this is a case where I play second register C sharp with the B key down, leaving the right hand down and the B key down for the second and third bars of K makes such a huge difference to the legato that I would be prepared to accept a slight intonation penalty. But as it happens, in E major, C sharp is the sixth, which in just intonation is quite flat. So any slight lowering and darkening of the C sharp should be to our advantage. For the rest of the solo, I leave the right hand down for the throat A and the G sharps. A bit more depth, a bit more resistance. Musically, if I were given the notation without dynamics, I don't think I would come up with what's in the part. It's certainly not bel canto. But I've looked at all of the editions of the score I could find, and they're all the same, so I assume the dynamics are Tchaikovsky's. If we look at the first statement of this melody in the violins, Tchaikovsky clearly intends for the second lower phrase to be louder rather than softer, as it would be if the voice followed the line. Now, in our part, they're both marked piano, so we don't have to do that. In the violin part, he also writes hairpins that are directly against the direction of the melodic movement. But that's a conductor problem. For the bass clarinet part, I'll just do my best to make the dynamics in my part work. The first phrase is simple, piano. The second phrase, we start piano, but we grow fairly quickly and emphasize the louder restatement of the last four notes. Then the third phrase is marked piano, a decrescendo on the first G sharp. That invites, or at least does not prohibit, an echo on the restatement. I think it's worth doing. Now, there's a ways to go from the first statement of the third phrase to the end, and it's marked piano. So obviously it has to be a fairly healthy piano there. So if we do all of that, we've done Tchaikovsky's bidding. Except for that hairpin on the first half note ending the first phrase. I just can't. I will if the conductor insists, but to get to the end of the phrase and then put it kind of an aneurysm, the musical gesture is, no need to get graphic. The main melodic and rhythmic feature of this solo is the triplet pickup, which you could call it an anacrusis or an Auftakt if you wanted to sound fancy. But what's interesting about this triplet pickup is how it links Tchaikovsky's Manfred Symphony to Liszt's Dante Symphony. And it's probably not how you expect. Let's call that a segue. There is a deep connection between the two works, and the bass clarinet is at the center of that connection. The Romantic period was a crucible of art. Tchaikovsky, Liszt, Berlioz, three pioneers of programmatic music, were all alive at the same time, and all were influenced by each other, whether they admitted it or not. I kind of want to figure out how many great Romantic composers were alive at the same time, but that's work. I might as well just wait for somebody to ask ChatGPT. Now, according to his letters, Tchaikovsky was not a huge fan of Liszt. He criticized him for being bombastic. Mr. Pott, I have Mr. Kettle on line 2. That said, evidently Tchaikovsky came to love Liszt's Dante Symphony later in life, and there was a degree of mutual respect between the two composers all along. Each made an arrangement of a work by the other. Liszt's Dante Symphony was finished in 1857. If you're one of the 200 or so people who watched my video about the Dante Symphony, you will recall the words of Francesca da Rimini from the Divine Comedy, to which the bass clarinet solo was set. Nessun maggior dolore che ricordarsi tempo felice nella miseria. There is no greater sorrow than to recall happy times in our present misery. That's important. In 1881, Tchaikovsky set those same lines to music, first in a sketchbook, and then harmonized in a letter to Nadezhda von Meck. This is from TchaikovskyResearch.net. Note the triplet pickups. This music, with some changes, became the Astarte theme in Manfred Symphony, which was composed in 1885. Unless you have a thing for rabbit holes like I do, and according to YouTube analytics, there are not many of us, or unless you have read Lord Byron's epic poem Manfred, which is probably equally rare, you're asking, what the heck is the Astarte theme? Hang in there. This is interesting. I'll make it as concise as possible. The idea of a symphony based on the poem Manfred originated with the Russian critic Vladimir Stasov, who wrote a program based on the poem and gave it to nationalistic composer Mily Balakirev, who was one of Tchaikovsky's greatest influences. Helped him a lot. Balakirev didn't feel up to composing the symphony, though, and he tried to hand it off to Berlioz in 1867. Berlioz declined. In 1882, Balakirev suggested the program to Tchaikovsky, who also declined, saying that the subject left him cold. Now, keeping track of the timeline, Tchaikovsky's musical setting of the words Nessun maggior dolore already existed. He already had composed music for No Greater Sorrow. Now, although Tchaikovsky declined initially, Balakirev was persistent. In 1884, Balakirev asked again, and a short time after that, Tchaikovsky, while caring for his friend Josef Kotek, who was dying of consumption in Davos, Switzerland, I have to keep track of who we're talking about, Tchaikovsky reread Manfred there, his friend's bedside, in an alpine setting, just like the poems, and he changed his mind. So before we get any further, we should talk a little bit about the actual poem. And don't worry, no, I am not going to read the entire poem, but we need to know who and what Manfred is. By all means, read the poem yourself. I'll put a link in the description. The poem's protagonist, Manfred, is a mortal man, but not a common mortal man. Commentators sometimes refer to him as a magician. Manfred possesses uncommon intelligence and intensity of thought, and through a lifetime of learning, he has elevated himself to a plane of existence where he is able to summon spirits and speak to them at least as an equal. Often in the poem, he defies them or commands them. The beginning of the poem finds Manfred wandering in the Alps, sick of life and tormented by the memory of his dead love, Astarte. Their love, for some unspecified reason, was forbidden, and she died in some unspecified, violent way, which for some unspecified reason was Manfred's fault. Not by my hand, Manfred says, but blood was shed. Manfred summoned spirits with an incantation. Byron never makes it quite clear what theological system we're in, so let's call them nature spirits or minor deities, and he asks that they remove his memory of Astarte. They cannot. They have no power over the past. He decides to commit suicide by jumping off a cliff, but is saved by a chamois hunter because dialogue. Rest of the poem, more stuff happens. Waterfall, spirit, all this stuff, peasant frivolities. In the end, Manfred crashes a meeting of the Fates, another theological system, and convinces them to summon the ghost of Astarte, who tells him that he will die the next day, which he does, but not before rejecting the attempts of the abbot to save his soul, another theological system, saying that he will give his soul neither to hell nor to heaven, only to himself. What? The story is actually kind of a braggadocious mess, but here's the deal. Manfred is Lord Byron's alter ego. Lord Byron was quite a character. If you want to see just how much trouble an English peer could get into, Google him. Byron's marriage to the wealthy Annabalia Milbank failed in 1816 because of Byron's highly inappropriate relationship with his half-sister, the daughter of his father's first wife. He was ostracized in London, possibly threatened with lynching, and he fled to Switzerland, where he wrote Manfred in 1817. Alps, tormented genius, forbidden love, you see the connection. The creative genius as a sort of Superman and a law unto himself was a popular romantic theme. Think of Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, think of Friedrich Nietzsche's Zarathustra. But I don't believe the Superman thing is what caused Tchaikovsky to warm to a subject that previously left him cold. It was the theme of forbidden love and loss. Tchaikovsky had already composed Francesca da Rimini and Romeo and Juliet, both about forbidden love. The dying friend Tchaikovsky was visiting in Switzerland was, by all accounts, an extraordinary young man. And by some accounts, he was a great love of Tchaikovsky's life. Thus, the Manfred Symphony. Byron has the forbidden and lost, although not actually dead, Augusta. Manfred has the forbidden and lost Astarte. Note the similarity in the two names. And Tchaikovsky has Joseph Kotek. This is where we come back to the music Tchaikovsky composed to Dante's words of Francesca da Rimini in 1881. Nessun maggior dolore che ricordarsi tempo felice nella miseria. There is no greater sorrow than to remember happy times in our present memory. Now, Tchaikovsky knew Divine Comedy as well as anybody, and it's certainly possible that he picked out Francesca's words on his own in 1881 for no reason. But Tchaikovsky's Francesca da Rimini symphonic fantasy had already been finished 5 years earlier. Why was he thinking about these lines in 1881? Why did he set them to music, apparently for their own sake, not for a specific work? I believe that we're coming to the point in Tchaikovsky's life where he began to gain greater appreciation for Liszt, and that this idea comes from the Dante Symphony. You can have it. Maybe there's a dissertation in there. So here's the program for the first movement, written by Stasov. Obviously a translation. Manfred wanders in the Alps, weary of the fatal question of existence, tormented by hopeless longings and the memory of past crimes. He suffers cruel spiritual pangs. He has plunged into occult sciences and commands the mighty powers of darkness, but neither they nor anything in this world can give him the forgetfulness to which alone he vainly aspires. The memory of the lost Astarte, once passionately loved, gnaws his heart, and there is neither limit nor end to Manfred's despair. So there's music for that, of course. With the bassoons, we begin the symphony with Manfred's theme. So forth. In this movement, there's quite a lot of that. Obviously, there has to be music to portray the beauty of Astarte and Manfred's longing for her, and this is where the Nessun Major Dolore music is used. The theme played first at letter H by the violins is the music that Tchaikovsky composed. It's played by the violins. Joseph Kotek was a violinist. There is no greater sorrow. Then the melody is given to the solo bass clarinet. Why? The rest of the symphony, bass clarinet, we mostly play fourth bassoon or fifth horn. Why would we suddenly be handed the Astarte theme? I believe, or choose to believe, that it's Tchaikovsky's tip of the cap to Franz Liszt in the Dante Symphony, where the bass clarinet first gives voice to the beautiful, suffering Francesca da Rimini. Nessun Major Dolore. Two great symphonies, two bass clarinet solos, not a coincidence. And as the late, great Paul Harvey would say, now you know the rest of the story. The bass clarinet solo in Manfred's Symphony is certainly pretty music, and maybe that's enough. On one level, all you have to do is play it so it sounds pretty. But on another level, if you can imagine the longing and grief that inspired Tchaikovsky at the bedside of his dying friend to change his mind and create this work of art, maybe it can be more than just a pretty solo. Go get 'em.